The silk of the dress was a whisper against my skin, a cool, liquid weight that felt more like a costume than a commitment. From my seat at the head of the long, lacquered table, the ballroom stretched out like a galaxy of crystal and starlight. Hundreds of guests, men in severe, dark suits and women in jewels that glittered like captured constellations, murmured in a language that was a melody I couldn't understand. Their faces were a sea of polite, unreadable masks. At 18, I had never felt so young or so profoundly out of place. This was my wedding dinner. I was the bride. And I was entirely, terrifyingly alone. Then she appeared. A woman carved from jade and judgment, her dark green dress shimmering under the recessed lighting. Her hair was a perfect, severe coil of obsidian, and the diamonds at her throat were cold, hard points of light. She moved with a silent, deliberate grace that made the air around her seem to thin. She stopped beside my chair, her shadow falling over the pristine white plate in front of me. She did not look at me. She looked at the empty seat beside me, the one reserved for her son. "My husband. You cannot sit here." The voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it sliced through the low hum of the room. A few heads turned. The air grew still, heavy with a sudden, predatory attention. I looked up at her, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. Kyoko. My new mother-in-law. We had met only once before, a brief, sterile introduction where her eyes had swept over me as if I were a piece of furniture that displeased her. "I'm sorry," I asked, my voice barely a breath. Her gaze finally dropped to me, and it was like being assessed by a hawk. There was no warmth, only a chilling, absolute certainty. "This is the family table," she stated, as if explaining a simple fact to a child. "For the clan. You are not family. You are a guest. The staff will show you to a more appropriate seat. Perhaps near the kitchens. You will be more comfortable there." Humiliation, hot and sharp, flooded my veins. Near the kitchens. Like a servant. Every eye in the vicinity was on us now, watching, waiting. This wasn't just an insult, it was a public declaration. A dismissal. She was marking me as an outsider, a temporary inconvenience in her son's world. My hands, hidden in the voluminous folds of my white dress, clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. I was a bride in a palace, being told to eat with the help. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. I opened my mouth to say something, I didn't know what. To argue. To stand. To run. But no words came. I was a girl from a world of walk-up apartments and city buses, a world where arguments were loud and feelings were messy, but you knew where you stood. This world, his world, was different. It operated on a language of silence and shadow, of power expressed not in shouts, but in the chilling quiet of a pronouncement like this. That was when he arrived. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was the only warning. A current of deference, of fear, parted the guests like a ship's prow through water. He moved like the room owed him space, and it gave it to him without question. Takahhiro. He was a masterpiece of lethal control, his tuxedo tailored by someone who understood that the true measure of a man's power was in the precision of his silhouette. His white shirt was stark against the bronze of his skin, and the faint, silvery trace of a scar disappeared into the hairline at his temple. But it was his hands that always held my attention. They were elegant, with long fingers, but they rested at his sides with an unnerving stillness, as if they knew their own capacity for violence and had no need to advertise it. He didn't look at the room. He didn't look at his mother. His eyes, dark and unreadable as polished stone, found mine. For a heartbeat, the entire, suffocating ballroom fell away. There was only the silent question in his gaze. He stopped beside his mother, his presence a sudden, immense pressure in the air. The scent of him, cedar and something clean and sharp like winter air, cut through the cloying sweetness of the flowers. "Mother," he said. His voice was low, a velvet rumble that held no warmth. It was a statement, not a greeting. Kyoko inclined her head, a queen acknowledging a prince. "Son, I was just explaining to your bride." The seating arrangements, the slight pause before the word bride, was a razor blade. Takahiro's gaze slid from me to her. The temperature in our small radius seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The authority he commanded was absolute, woven into the fabric of his being. "You were mistaken," he said. The words were simple, devoid of emotion, but they landed with the finality of a gavel. He pulled out the chair beside me, the one he was meant to sit in, and angled it toward his mother. He did not invite her to sit. It was an order. With a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw, she sank into the chair, her spine ramrod straight. Then he did something that made a gasp ripple through the nearby tables. He knelt. Not in supplication, but with the deliberate grace of a predator crouching. He knelt on the priceless Persian rug, his tuxedo creasing, so that his eyes were level with his mother's. The room held its breath. "Nadia," he said, his voice a low command that resonated in my bones. He was speaking to his mother, but he used my name like a shield or a weapon. "Is my wife. She is the head of my table. She is the mistress of my house. She is the future of this family." Each declaration was a perfectly placed stone, building a wall around me. "You," he continued, the word chillingly soft, "are a guest at her table. You will treat her with the respect she is owed. Or you will be escorted from this building and from my life. There will not be a second warning." He rose, the motion fluid and seamless. He looked down at his stunned mother, whose face had become a pale, tight mask of fury. Then he turned, walked around the table, and took his seat beside me. He picked up his napkin as if nothing had happened, the crisp linen a stark white against the dark gray of his trousers. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a living thing, thick with shock and the undeniable weight of his power. He had not just defended me. He had redrawn the map of his world and placed me at its center, in front of everyone. He had chained me to him, not with a ring, but with a declaration of war against his own blood. And as he turned to look at me, his dark eyes holding mine, I knew the wedding dinner was over. The real ceremony had just begun. A silent signal, a flick of his fingers to a man standing against the far wall, and the room began to breathe again. Music swelled, a soft orchestral piece that felt like a deliberate lie against the tension still crackling in the air. Waiters materialized, pouring wine and setting down the first course. Chiyoko remained frozen in her chair, a statue of incandescent rage. She did not eat. She did not drink. She simply stared at a point over my shoulder, her defeat a poison she was forced to swallow. Takahhiro leaned toward me, his shoulder brushing mine. The contact was electric, a jolt of heat that shot straight through the silk. "Eat," he murmured, his voice for my ears only. It wasn't a suggestion. I picked up my fork, my hand trembling slightly. I stared at the intricate arrangement of seafood and microgreens on my plate. It looked beautiful and utterly alien. I took a bite. It tasted of nothing. All I could feel was the searing intensity of his presence beside me, a solid wall of heat and coiled danger. He had shielded me, yes, but in doing so, he'd painted a target on my back so large it might as well have been visible from space. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and silent threats. People came to the table to offer congratulations, their bows deep, their eyes flickering from Takahiro's impassive face to my own, searching for a crack in the facade. I smiled until my cheeks ached, my posture mimicking the regal stillness I saw in him. I was learning a new language, the language of survival in a gilded cage. When it was finally over, he stood, and a subtle motion of his hand dismissed the guards who had materialized around our table. He took my hand, his grip firm and cool. "Come," he said, and led me not toward the grand exit, but through a discreet door behind the head table. We walked down a series of sterile, silent corridors, the plush carpet muffling our footsteps. The distant sounds of the party faded, replaced by an unnerving quiet. He led me into a private suite, vast and impersonal, with a wall of glass overlooking the glittering Tokyo skyline. He released my hand and walked to the window, his back to me. "She will not trouble you again," he said to the city lights. My voice, when I found it, was shaking. "What was that, Takahhiro? That wasn't just a disagreement." He turned slowly. In the dim light, the scar at his temple seemed more prominent. It was a correction. My mother values tradition above all else. She sees you as a disruption to that tradition. A disruption? The word was so clinical, so detached. She told me to go sit with the kitchen staff at my own wedding. She called me an outsider. And I told her what you are, he countered, his gaze intense. The future of this family. That is not a title. It is a fact. And a burden. That was when I felt the first real tremor of fear. Not the social anxiety of the ballroom, but a deep, primal dread. A burden? What have you gotten me into? He was silent for a long moment, studying my face. My father's first choice for a wife, he began, his voice dropping lower, was a girl from a respectable family. She was perfect in every way. My mother approved. The clans approved, he paused, his jaw tight. She was killed a week before the wedding. A message from our rivals. They knew taking her was the easiest way to wound him, to show he could not protect what was his. The air left my lungs. The beautiful dress suddenly felt like a shroud. This wasn't about disrespect. It was about vulnerability. His mother hadn't just insulted me. She had declared me a weak point. And his rivals would have been listening. They saw her as a liability, I whispered, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. They saw her as leverage, he corrected, his voice hard. My mother believes any connection outside the established order is a weakness. She believes love is a vulnerability we cannot afford. By bringing you here, by marrying you. I have told our enemies that I do not share her belief. He took a step closer, his shadow engulfing me. I have told them you are important to me. And that makes you a target. Before I could process the terrifying implication of his words, a sharp, cracking sound echoed from the hallway, followed by a muffled shout. Takahhiro moved faster than I could have imagined. In a single, fluid motion, he crossed the room, his hand grabbing my arm, pulling me behind him as he flattened us both against the wall beside the door. His body was a shield of muscle and tailored wool, pressing me into the cold plaster. I could feel the thrum of his heart, a steady, powerful beat against my back. Stay behind me, he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. And do not make a sound. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own pulse. His hand was still on my arm, a brand of heat. I had a choice in that moment. The window was huge. The drop was fatal. But the service elevators were probably just down the hall. I could run. I could scream. I could try to disappear back into the ordinary world I came from. But as I stood there, sheltered by the body of this dangerous man, I saw something on the floor near his feet. A small, black lacquered pin, dislodged from his tuxedo in his haste. It was in the shape of a hawk, the symbol of his clan. Without thinking, my hand darted out, my fingers closing around the cool metal. It was a small, foolish gesture. But as my fingers curled around it, I knew I wasn't going to run. Running felt like a betrayal, not of him, but of the girl who had sat at that table and refused to crumble. He noticed the movement. His head turned slightly, his dark eyes locking onto my hand, clutching the pin. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. In the charged silence of that hallway, with unknown danger lurking just outside the door, a silent pact was forged. I had made a deliberate choice. I was staying. And in his gaze, I saw not surprise, but a flicker of something else. Something that looked dangerously like respect. The stakes had just been raised from a social humiliation to a matter of life and death, and the war for my place in this world had truly begun. The door to the suite burst open. Two of Takahhiro's men, their faces grim, stormed in, guns held low and ready. They stopped short upon seeing us, their expressions a mixture of relief and alarm. "Report," Takahhiro commanded, his voice never rising above a low growl. He didn't move away from me, his body still a partial shield. "A breach on the west perimeter," the first man said, his Japanese clipped and rapid. I didn't need a translation to understand the urgency. Two men from the Inagawa clan. They were testing the response time. They've been neutralized. Neutralized. The word hung in the air, cold and sterile. It meant they were dead. My stomach churned. This was real. Men had just died just a few feet from where I stood. Takahiro's jaw tightened. The Inagawa clan. His chief rivals. Was there a message? The second man held up a small, clear bag. Inside was a single, perfect white gardenia, its petals bruised and browning at the edges. A flower known for its beauty and its fragility. A flower just like the ones woven into my bridal bouquet. It wasn't just a probe. It was a promise. We know who she is. We can get to her. Takahiro's eyes went cold. It was a terrifying transformation, the last vestige of civility stripped away, leaving only the predatory stillness of the Yakuza boss. He turned to me, his gaze sweeping over me, checking for injuries I didn't have. You are not hurt. It was a statement, not a question. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I uncurled my fingers and held out the hawk pin. His eyes dropped to my palm, then back to my face. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped, and I saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. He took the pin from me, his fingers brushing mine. The contact was brief, but it sent a tremor through me. Take her to our personal residence, he ordered the men, his voice once again a blade of ice. Full security protocol. No one gets in or out without my direct authorization. No 1 inch. And you, sir? The first man asked. A chillingly blank smile touched Takahiro's lips. I have a debt to collect. He left without another word, a ghost of violence trailing in his wake. The 2 guards flanked me, their presence suffocating. They led me through a labyrinth of service tunnels to a private elevator that descended deep into the hotel's foundation. We emerged in a sterile concrete garage, where a black, armored sedan waited, its engine purring. The ride through Tokyo was a silent, surreal blur of neon and shadow. I was a prisoner in my own fairy tale, being escorted from one gilded cage to another. The residence was a fortress disguised as a minimalist masterpiece. It was a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of a sleek, anonymous skyscraper in Shinjuku, a palace of glass, steel, and polished black stone. There were no photographs. No personal touches. It was as beautiful and as soulless as a museum. The guards posted themselves outside the main door, leaving me alone in the cavernous living room. The city glittered below me, a silent, sprawling beast. I was still in my wedding dress. The beautiful, hopeful garment now felt like a mockery. I found the master bedroom and peeled it off, letting the silk and lace pool on the floor like a fallen cloud. I stood under the scalding spray of a shower that was larger than my entire childhood bathroom, scrubbing my skin as if I could wash away the events of the night. But the feeling of his body shielding mine, the memory of his low voice in my ear, the cold dread of the bruised gardenia, they were etched into me. He didn't return for hours. I found a simple silk robe in the closet and wrapped myself in it, pacing the cold stone floors. I was exhausted, but sleep felt like a distant country I could no longer visit. When he finally walked in, just before dawn, he looked unchanged. His tuxedo was still immaculate, his posture erect. But there was a new tension in his shoulders and a faint, dark smudge on the cuff of his white shirt that I was certain hadn't been there before. It looked like dried blood. He stopped in the center of the room, watching me. Did my men make you comfortable? They're guards, Takahhiro. Not hosts, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Is this my life now? Being shuffled between secure locations while you go out and collect debts. This is our life now, he corrected softly. The life you chose when you stayed in that hallway. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, he countered, taking a step closer. The air between us crackled. You could have run. You could have screamed. You could have made yourself a liability. You didn't. You secured the pin, and you waited for my instruction. You acted like a partner, not a victim. I stared at him, my anger warring with a confusing flutter of something else. Pride? I don't know how to be what you want me to be. I'm not one of you. I don't want you to be one of my soldiers, he said, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously intimate. I want you to be you. Your instincts tonight, they were flawless. You are a survivor, Nadia. That is far more valuable in my world than a lifetime of training. He was close now, so close I could see the faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He reached out, not to touch me, but to tuck a stray curl behind my ear. His fingers grazed my cheek, a feather-light touch that was more potent than any kiss. I told myself, he murmured, his gaze locked on mine, that this marriage was a strategic necessity. A way to consolidate power and show my rivals that I am not my father. That I will not be bound by the old ways. He paused, and his thumb brushed my lower lip. I told myself staying was survival. I was lying to myself. It was a confession. Not of love, but of something far more complex and perilous. An admission of a truth he had tried to deny. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me all night. My breath hitched. What are you saying? I am saying, he whispered, his eyes dark with a nameless emotion, that my mother was right about one thing. You are a disruption. But not to my empire. To me. The moment was shattered by the shrill ring of a secure phone on the far wall. He stiffened, the spell breaking. He turned and answered it, listening intently. His face, which had been open to me for a fleeting second, became a mask of stone once more. He hung up and turned back to me, his expression grim. That was my head of security. The Inagawa clan sent a gift. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Another flower. His eyes were bleak. Worse. They sent it to your mother's apartment in Brooklyn. He didn't have to say what the gift was. The threat was unmistakable. They weren't just targeting me anymore. They were reaching across the world, into my past, threatening the only family I had. They were making it personal. They were going to burn down my world to get to his. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut. But it was overshadowed by a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. They had made a mistake. They thought my old life was my weakness. They didn't know that it was the source of all my strength. I looked at Takahhiro, at this lethal, complicated man who had dragged me into his war. What do we do? I asked. The word we hung in the air between us, a vow. I had crossed a line. I was no longer just a bride or a victim. I was a player in the game. And I would be damned if I let them win. Takahiro's expression shifted, a flicker of dark admiration in his eyes. He had expected fear, tears, pleas to send me away. He had not expected this. He had not expected me. We do not react, he said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. We retaliate. But first, we secure your mother. My team is already on their way to her. She will be brought here, to Tokyo, where I can protect her. The thought of my mother, with her loud laugh and her no-nonsense attitude, being thrown into this world of silent violence was dizzying. She won't come. She won't understand. She will have no choice, Takahhiro stated with absolute finality. Just as you had no choice, he saw the protest in my eyes and held up a hand. You chose to stay. You did not choose for them to target your family. That is a debt they now owe me. And I always collect. The next few days were a masterclass in controlled chaos. While a team of Takahiro's most trusted men flew to New York, we moved from the penthouse to a more traditional, and far more secure, family estate on the outskirts of Kyoto. It was a place of serene gardens, koi ponds, and ancient wood, surrounded by walls 10 feet high and guards who seemed to melt into the shadows. Here, Takahiro's mother, Chiyoko, held court. She was a silent, simmering presence, her disapproval a constant, suffocating pressure. She watched my every move, her eyes cold and critical. She saw me as the cause of this chaos, the foreign element that had invited disaster. I did not try to win her over. I did not try to appease her. I spent my time learning. I watched Takahhiro. I listened to the coded conversations. I learned to distinguish the footsteps of his lieutenants from those of the household staff. I learned that the clink of a teacup being set down could be a signal. I was no longer the frightened girl in the wedding dress. I was becoming something harder, something forged in the fire of this new reality. One evening, I found Takahhiro in the garden, standing by the koi pond. The setting sun cast long shadows across the perfectly raked gravel. He was staring into the water, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. They have her, he said without turning around. Your mother is on a private jet. She will land in 4 hours. Relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. Is she safe? Is she okay? She is displeased, he said, a rare, faint hint of amusement in his tone. She apparently hit one of my men with her purse. A man who is trained to kill with his bare hands. A laugh escaped me, the first genuine one in days. It sounded strange and foreign in the silent garden. That sounds like her. He finally turned to face me. You're like her, he said quietly. That same fire. I did not see it at first. I saw a beautiful girl I could use to secure my position. And now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He stepped closer, closing the space between us. He reached out and cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. Now I see the woman who will be the mother of my heirs. The queen my empire needs. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, a coronation. The Inagawa thought they were threatening my weakness. Instead, they revealed my strength. That was when the world exploded. A deafening blast ripped through the serene garden, shattering the tranquility. The ground shuddered. One of the stone lanterns near the wall erupted in a shower of rock and flame. Ambush. They hadn't waited. They had come here. To his home. Takahhiro's reaction was instantaneous. He threw himself at me, his body a solid weight, tackling me to the ground behind the thick stone basin of the pond as gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off the rock above our heads. His men were shouting, returning fire. The air filled with the acrid smell of cordite and the screams of the wounded. There inside the walls, he grunted, his body covering mine completely. I was trapped between the cold, damp earth and the solid heat of his body. A betrayal. Someone let them in. His eyes darted around, calculating, assessing. I could feel the tension in every muscle. He was outnumbered, caught off guard in his own sanctuary. This was it. The moment they had been waiting for. Then I saw it. Through the chaos, I saw Chiyoko. She was standing on the veranda, frozen, her face a mask of horror. And behind her, stepping out of the shadows of the house, was a man in an Inagawa uniform, his gun raised, aimed directly at her. He was going to execute her right here as a final, brutal message to her son. Takahhiro saw it too. A raw, agonized sound tore from his throat. He was pinned down, protecting me. He couldn't get to her in time. He was going to watch his mother die because of a choice he made. I didn't think. I acted. Cover me. I screamed, and before he could react, I squirmed out from under him. I grabbed a heavy, softball-sized rock from the edge of the pond. Adrenaline surged through me, a white-hot fire. I ran, my silk robe flying behind me, a flash of color in the deepening twilight. I ran not at the gunman, but toward the house at an angle. Nadia, no. Takahhiro roared, a sound of pure terror. I didn't listen. I put my head down and ran like I was running for a bus in Brooklyn. Just as the gunman was steadying his aim on Chiyoko, I hurled the rock with all my might, not at him, but at the massive, ancient ceramic vase on a pedestal just to his right. The rock struck true. The vase, a priceless antique, exploded in a shower of sharp, heavy ceramic shards. The gunman flinched, startled by the sudden, violent noise and the rain of debris. It was only a second's hesitation. But it was all Takahhiro needed. He moved like a blur, a dark wraith rising from behind the pond. The gunshot that rang out wasn't from the Inagawa gunman. It was from the small, sleek pistol that had appeared in Takahhiro's hand as if by magic. The gunman dropped without a sound, a neat, dark hole appearing in his chest. Silence fell, thick and heavy, broken only by the crackling of the burning lantern. Takahhiro's men were securing the grounds, their movements swift and brutal. I stood, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands were scraped and bleeding from the rock. I looked from the dead man to Chiyoko, who was staring at me, her face pale with shock, her usual mask of contempt completely gone. Takahhiro walked toward me, his eyes blazing. He didn't check on his mother. He didn't look at the body. He came straight to me. He grabbed my shoulders, his grip painfully tight, and shook me once. "Don't you ever," he snarled, his voice thick with a terrifying mixture of fury and relief, "do that again." Then he crushed me to him, his arms wrapping around me like steel bands, his face buried in my hair. I could feel him trembling. "Don't you ever do that again," he repeated, but this time it was a broken whisper. A plea. He held me for a long moment, right there in the middle of the carnage, clinging to me as if I were the only solid thing in his world. In that embrace, everything fell away. The titles, the clans, the empires. There was only a man who had almost lost everything and the woman who had refused to let him. When he finally pulled back, he didn't let me go. He kept one arm wrapped tightly around my waist, holding me to his side. He turned to face his mother. Chiyoko looked at me, then at her son holding me, and for the first time, I saw something other than hate in her eyes. It was a look of dawning, grudging understanding. She had seen what I had done. I, the outsider, had saved her life when her own clan's walls had failed. "It is done," Takahhiro said, his voice ringing with absolute authority in the quiet garden. He looked at Chiyoko, but his words were for me, for his men, for the whole world to hear. He brought my scraped, dirty hand to his lips and kissed my knuckles, a gesture of profound, public reverence. The debt is paid. He was not talking about the Inagawa. He was talking about the debt of honor I had just created. I had saved his mother. I had saved his honor. In his world, there was no currency more valuable. The cost of this victory was high. The betrayal had run deep, and the ensuing purge was swift and merciless. But through it all, he never left my side. We stood on that same veranda a week later, watching the sun rise. The garden had been cleared of debris, but the scars remained on the stone, on the earth, on us. My mother was safe, installed in a luxurious apartment, complaining loudly but secretly thrilled by the drama. Chiyoko had retreated into a quiet, watchful silence, her war with me over. Takahhiro's hand found mine, his fingers lacing with mine. It was no longer the hand of a stranger, but a familiar weight, a grounding presence. This was not the life I had ever imagined, but it was my life. I had made a choice in that hallway and another in that garden. I had chosen this man, this world, this violence, this love. He said my name, and the way it sounded on his lips was different now. It was not the name of a stranger or a bride or a liability. It was the name of a queen. He turned me to face him, his dark eyes holding a truth that no longer needed to be spoken. He had started this to claim an empire, but in the end, it was I who had claimed him. And as he lowered his head to finally kiss me, not with the fire of passion, but with the quiet finality of a vow, I knew I would never be that girl from Brooklyn again. I was home,